in the United States of America, voting is the most fundamental freedom because it gives legitimacy to those who govern us. It's foundational. We know that the history of voting in the United States has not always been a pretty one. We have the legacy of the vote being withheld, being the initially the franchise belonging to white property owners, the trauma, legacy of slavery, even after the Civil War, the brief flourishing of Reconstruction, followed by the horrors of Jim Crow, the Civil Rights Movement. Lauren is going to talk to you tonight about the work of Fair Fight, but in particular about her and Fair Fight's preparation. We're proud to be in a supporting role. She is leading this, she and Fair Fight are leading this work, particularly in the South, to deal with the most dangerous attack yet on the effort to push back on Jim Crow and the safety and security of civil rights. And that is the case of Calais v. Louisiana at the Supreme Court. As you heard from Esther, you'll hear more from Lauren. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act was designed to make sure that we do not have racial discrimination in voting and election-related matters, and the Supreme Court is about to tear that away. They're going to undo decades, perhaps longer, of progress towards the American dream. We cannot allow that to go unanswered. Peaceful, lawful, vigorous effort must be deployed at large scale in the court of law, the court of public opinion, the ultimate safeguard of a democracy, the people. And just as so many said on January 20th, oh, come on, you'll never be able to meet Trump's flood the zone. You'll never be able to equal it. You'll never be able to stop him. Well, we've stopped him, the coalition and democracy defenders, with your support again and again and again, with rule of law, shock and awe, court of law, court of public opinion. Lauren has a plan to do the same thing. And when Lauren Groh-Wargo and Fair Fight have a plan, it becomes a reality. So those who want to steal equal, free, and fair voting in our country and restore Jim Crow had better watch out. I'm very pleased to introduce my friend, Lauren Groh-Wargo.
Well, Norm Eisen, that is an awesome introduction. We have been causing a lot of good trouble and thick as thieves now for many years, and getting to know you through the 2020 fight and after has been fantastic. Norm is one of the national partners that we work strategically with every week. And he has built an incredible kind of coordination way for all of us to talk across the ecosystem. That's been very helpful. And so I'm so grateful for you, Norm. And we're going to collectively drive a strategy around the gutting of the Voting Rights Act that galvanizes not just the South, but the country to make plain that Americans are not going to tolerate a new creation of a confederacy, which will lead to a one-party system. That's the bottom line. They are far along in what I call their new Southern strategy. They're in the sort of final phases of it. And so I'm so grateful for Force Multiplier for inviting me to speak with you all today. Is that sometimes these topics kind of get sidelined as like a voting rights thing or a Southern thing, but we have enough time today to kind of take the step back and walk through why these voting rights issues and these Southern issues are now fundamental to our two-party construct. I'm going to go through these with some care, and then we will have time for some Q&A because I recognize that this is fairly dense. And we will also we have summary memos and talking points and backgrounds on Calais. So for those of you who want to do further reading, you don't have to take notes. We'll put a document in the chat so you can really wrap your arms around it if you are interested in that. So as I said, we see this as sort of the new Southern strategy, and we've got to disrupt it. So as we go into this, here is the quick 101. We run the largest, out of Verified Action, the largest media monitoring and tracking operation on the voter suppression ascendant networking in the United States. They're the ones writing the executive orders on elections. They're writing the SAVE Act. They're driving the strategy with DOJ. They're putting their people into DHS. And so we monitor their work and get ahead of it so we have defensive strategies. The top three things as we prepare for next year, I call it the latest and not greatest. And I'm sure some of you saw the recent coverage in the New York Times and CNN that came out of our research that they're creating a pretense to manufacture a national emergency on elections, which is not an emergency power that the president has, but they're going to try to create one. There is current debate, and you can read about it now in the press. Do they use emergency powers that they don't have? Do they try to do an insurrection act? What do they do to try to set up the conditions to try to change the rules on the elections? But more importantly, how they can change the outcome, right? And so they're looking at a myriad set of strategies and tactics to do that while they're driving the strategy that we'll talk about. We expect, for example, two things coming out soon. Number one, you all have been following or have seen, DOJ has been collecting voter files from states across the country, right? Why are they doing that? Because they're going to issue a report that there's all this fraudulent folks on the ballot or on the rolls, which is not true, and use that as a pretense. They're going to have Tulsi Gabbard release, or somebody in that orbit release, a report on foreign interference in elections, we expect, to try to create this pretense. So that's sort of creating a pretense on some sort of elections takeover. None of it will be illegal, but obviously they are aggressive. Number two, they're running a full court press using all their tools, the Elections Assistance Commission, state legislatures, their local election administrators that they have in place across the state to implement their 10-point elections administrative agenda. So it is a full court press. We saw, for example, earlier this year in about 24 states, state level SAVE Acts trying to create documentary proof of citizenship so that you basically have to have a passport to stay on the rolls, or a birth certificate or a marriage certificate. These are targeted to make it harder to register and stay on the rolls and disproportionately impact Democratic leaning groups. And then number three, a component of all of this is their new Southern strategy, which has been underway ever since we won the Voting Rights Act in the 60s, trying to pull that back and lock one party rule of Congress and destroy Black and Latino political power along the way. So what Team MAGA has figured out is that the gutting of Section 2, which we'll talk about in the Voting Rights Act, achieves their top twin goals. By gutting Black and Latino political power in this country, they achieve their white supremacy goals. Some of you can think about their anti-DEI, anti-affirmative action, their erasure of Black history and gay history and all of the rest. But it's the most expedient way to lock one party rule of Congress as well. And that's what we'll walk through today. The next slide is another way to look at what they are doing, which is sort of two big buckets. They have literally a 10-point plan. I cannot make this up. They have a 10-point plan they released in December. It's not funny, but you got to laugh. In December, a 10-point plan on how they're going to change the midterms and how they are working aggressively at every single level to do so. There's two buckets: voting process and methods, documentary proof of citizenship, like I talked about, litigation that just last week the Supreme Court agreed to hear about the issue of mail ballots and ballot receipt deadlines. That case is actually about whether or not it's lawful to have any voting outside of the date of the election. These are very radical cases that they're moving through because they actually are on a mission to get rid of not only mail voting, but early vote. They'd like us all to vote in long lines on election day because that's very effective voter suppression. So they're running a series of strategies around voting process and methods. And then this is one that's been getting a lot of headlines and we're going to spend more time on, is counting and who counts. Partisan voting machine standards, creating ability to throw out results they don't like, throw people off the rolls, changing certification rules, changing who counts in the census, mid-decade partisan gerrymandering like Texas and Missouri, gutting Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. So these are kind of the two general buckets. They're intertwined. Anybody who wants the full 10-point plan, we can put the link in the chat and you can read it yourself. So we're going to dive in now on Section 2 in the Voting Rights Act because I know this is a little bit confusing. So many of you probably remember like the Shelby decision, Holder v. Shelby during the second Obama term. That was about Section 5 and preclearance. Today, what we're talking about is Section 2, which was considered the crown jewel of the civil rights era movement to prohibit racial vote dilution. This is a core tenet of how you build a multiracial democracy, is that when there is racially or ethnically polarized voting, which there is in this country, those communities need the opportunity to have fair representation. And so Section 2 requires what's called an opportunity district to be drawn where the minority population is more than 50% of the population in a reasonably configured district. There has to be racially polarized voting, which there is. And typically you have to have another requirement is that the white preferred candidates tend to defeat the minority preferred candidates. And you look at the totality of the circumstances. And a key part of Section 2 and why we continue to win, the litigators continue to win, is it doesn't look at intent. It looks at the results. So you've been tracking this in some way or another, right? We've gotten second districts in Louisiana and Alabama, for example, in Congress, right? We have last week in Mississippi, you may have seen a little bit of news that we broke Republican supermajorities in the state legislature in Mississippi. That was successful Section 2 litigation and then campaigns. We were heavily involved in that. So this is so critical. And the South is where, anybody want to guess? Put in the chat. What percent of African Americans live in the South? We're going to do a little quiz. Put in the chat what percent of African Americans you think live in the traditional South. I'm going to tell you here soon. But go to the next slide. What Section 2 did was completely changed everything. In 1963, before this was passed, there were 4 black members of Congress. In 2023, there are 64. This has just been game changing. And today, what racially polarized voting looks like, the Voting Rights Act was never about partisanship. It was about opportunity for racial minorities to elect representatives of their choice. Today, the way this ends up working, the polarized voting is white voters in the South and generally tend to vote for Republicans, and black candidates in the South and everywhere tend to vote for Democrats. So y'all know there aren't many black members of Congress who are Republicans. We know their names. I'm not going to say them, right? And so how racially polarized voting in the VR Rights Act intertwine has a very significant partisan outcome. The Voting Rights Act does not speak to that. It's just talking about giving people the opportunity to elect their candidates. So what happened? Where we are today is currently the Roberts Court, the Federalist Society Court. I refuse to give it a positive moniker. They're supremely terrible court. Is that there was successful Section 2 litigation out of Louisiana led by Legal Defense Fund to get a second minority opportunity district in Louisiana. That candidate was elected. That decision was upheld. And then a group of one of my favorite terms of art, non-African American voters in Louisiana sued and said, no, this is actually discrimination. And this new map with the extra district is actually a violation of the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment that prohibits racial gerrymandering. These things all go together. The lawyers and history buffs here know that the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause was literally about protecting formerly enslaved people from discrimination. They are now using it to say white voters are being discriminated against in Louisiana. So this is very radical. But of course, our Federalist Society members asked them to come re-argue this, and they are considering this now. And we expect, based on the discussions and the politics of the court, that they're going to dramatically weaken Section 2 any day now. And in the Q&A, we can get into timing if you want to talk about that. Bottom line, TLDR, too long didn't read. We did a deep analysis of this with Black Voters Matter and released a report. Here's the bottom line. And again, we have this all written down for you. Go to the next slide. The national political impact between mid-decade gerrymandering and Section 2 gutting. We did this after Texas and after Missouri. So this doesn't take into account Indiana, North Carolina. 27 additional safe U.S. House seats, 19 of which are from gutting of Section 2. This is just like real life political. Where could they pass these maps? Where do they have the trifecta or the power to do so? The representational loss, unbelievably traumatic and dramatic. It would gut 30% of the Black caucus, about 15% of the Latino caucus. And the civil rights impact would essentially take America back to pre 1965 and would strip minority communities in our country from any effective political representation and give Republicans one party rule of Congress. This obviously also impacts everything down ballot, right? State legislative, school districts, everything, right? Rely on Section 2 and people's ability to have fairness and representation. So if you go to the next slide, we all know this is all Project 2025 and that ilk's plan. And there's a really, one of the things about doing this work in this day and age, which is very different than when I met Stacey Abrams, they say all the quiet part out loud all the time. It's very easy to get their intent. There's an article in Salon earlier this year on Steve Bannon's podcast. They lay out how they view it. They have three vectors where they don't have to win any more hearts and minds, but they can win more seats. Mid-decade partisan gerrymandering, which started right after this article really came out. It was like the beginning of that. The gutting of Section 2 with their case out of the non-African American voters in Louisiana, and then changing the way the census works. Their math is that if they do all three aggressively, their math is 42 total seats by the time you're on the other side of the census. So we all know we got to believe them now. This is not theory. They are going for it, and they're going for it as quickly as possible to try to take our power in 2026. They're not waiting for 2028. That's why you're seeing the breakneck speed. They would like us to be an electoral autocracy immediately, where they take away the opposition party and severely weaken us and prevent what happened locally in these last elections this fall from scaling and happening next year. So as our civil rights leaders and friends were arguing this in court, we knew we recognized the gap, that this was happening, but there was low awareness and that there was low analysis on, and no analysis. When we released this report, there was no public analysis on what the gutting of Section 2 would do in real life to the partisan composition of Congress. So our friends Latasha and Cliff at Black Voters Matter, we did an analysis, we co-released it with them, and became the citation from Nina Totenberg to Salon to all of the outlets, 800 citations coming out of our political article and the release of our report that we call What Happens in the South Doesn't Stay in the South, y'all. I'm from Cleveland. What happens down here is going to affect the whole country. We want to reposition how people think about voting rights as existential to our democracy in a way that hasn't been framed before. So we hustled to get this report out. Some friends of ours hustled to get it to Nate Cohn. Nate Cohn did a report that exactly mirrors our report. He just did less states. And to start a big conversation about this, Black Voters Matter got 9 busloads of Black Southerners to the steps of SCOTUS to start to signal to the court, we are not going quietly into the night. And here's what the maps look like. This is Nate Cohn's map. It doesn't include Texas and Missouri and Arkansas, but it's a sea of red, but it's really a sea of white. All right, what do we have in the chat? Can somebody help me out on force multiplier? Give me a couple of the guesses on percentage of Black Americans. And please say you didn't ask ChatGPT or Google. No cheating. Anybody?
You got 30, 42, 65, 40.
All right, the 65 was closest. 60% of Black Americans live in this region. And you can see today, the Florida districts are mainly Latino districts. And you can see what Section 2 would do. And if those of you are not super familiar with the South, I know you know these names. No more James Clyburn. No more South Carolina Black District. No more Benny Thompson in Mississippi. You can dilute, you can pack and crack Black communities and the Latino communities in Florida and Texas to have no capital D Democratic representation in Mississippi, which is 40% Black. Get it down to 3 districts instead of 5 in Georgia, which is 30% Black. Louisiana, 30% Black, can get it down to 0. Alabama, North Carolina, about 20% Black. The composition, North Carolina, the way people live, it's harder to completely eviscerate. Tennessee can go down to 0. So it is a whitewashing quite literally. And then they can draw themselves, for in most states, permanent super majorities in the state legislature. So for those of you who know how important that is, we do not have super minorities in all of our states. We're on the cusp of winning the House majority at the State House in Georgia, for example. So all of these and the other states that aren't this is what they could do. And we all remember, I know this group of political nerds remembers, my other pop quiz, apparently I'm doing pop quizzes tonight, Tom. Does anybody know off the top of their head, no cheating, how fast they drew the maps in Missouri? This is the one citation from Missouri that just makes me sick. I'm not going to make you all guess. I'm going to give you like 2 more seconds. 3 hours. 3 hours. They passed those maps. The Republicans are ready. In Louisiana, where this case is out, they had a special session 2 weeks ago to delay their candidate filing deadlines. They are ready. South Carolina, they're having an open public debate on whether or not they have a special session in December to go ahead and get rid of Clyburn, or should they wait for a decision. So we're on the cusp of a different kind of gerrymandering conversation that is centrally about Black Southerners and the expediency for them. So what are we doing about it? Well, number one, my friend Stacy always says this, and we all know this on this call. It's force multiplier. You all could be doing anything tonight, but when we fight, we win. We're fighting right now. It might seem very comfortable. We're sitting in our homes, but organizing is fighting, and when we fight, we win. That's the only solution. That is the only choice, right? It is also the story of the South. My dark humor for y'all Northerners is welcome to the South, y'all. You're all Southerners now. The Confederacy and fascism and rigging of maps and taking away of our reproductive rights, like that is how it is down here. And that is what they want to bring to the rest of the country. All right, so what are we doing about it? So we kicked off our campaign with the release of those maps. Keep this little map in mind over here. This little map over here is a 2026 Senate map, right? You're like, Lauren, but we're talking about the House. The opportunity, I have to view every crisis as an opportunity because Hillary was right. There's a vast right-wing conspiracy, but every crisis is an opportunity. So here's what we're going to do, and here's what we're working on through our launch of our plan. So number one, our strategic objective is to delay the decision. So we're working with Norm. What we're specifically working with Norm on with Black Voters Matter and Fair Fight is the elite media strategy to impact the court. Op-eds, press, et cetera, and working with the coalition to try to delay the decision, et cetera. And then raising awareness like crazy. A lot of Southerners, a lot of groups, a lot of leaders are not aware of this. So we are on a tear of awareness raising because the goal is to delay a decision, but to build the connective tissues that we can fight to delay it and delay the maps. And then number two, doing all of this work with a political eye out of our C4, because the opportunity of this crisis, by doing the comms and mobilization work and helping feed the litigators, that we can change the conversation in this country about what the GOP is really about in a way that completely destroys our democracy, that opens our tent really wide and allows us to go really deep. Because we think the opportunity here in Georgia, we have had multiple experiences, including most memorably the 2021 runoff, where talking about voter suppression in the right kind of way can have a positive backlash to have really strong turnout. And so our mission is to have the strongest possible turnout, delay the maps so we run on the current maps next year, win as much as we possibly can on the current maps, and put the Senate in play so that we can change the entire power dynamic. And when you look at the South, this strategy, if you go to the next two, should be able to help John Ossoff get reelected, get Roy Cooper elected, put Mississippi, Louisiana in play. Black voters and allies can help elect my former home state Senator Sherrod Brown. This is the opportunity of a lifetime to nationalize this conversation in a way that's rooted in the South, to talk about the importance of a multiracial democracy and a two-party system. The words I'm using is not the messaging, guys. You guys are insiders. This is not the voter messaging. I'm telling you the insider piece. So our top strategies that we're doing as part of a partnership with Black Voters Matter, with the national connectivity to Norm's group, LDF, NDRC, all the litigators, et cetera, voting rights groups, is a communication and mobilization strategy to get a coherent narrative across the region so we can leverage research and different coalitions and then to mobilize across the entire region. We're working on a positive, proactive campaign to roll out in January around our democracy, and then use this to build our leadership, our connectivity across the business community, the Never Trumpers, movement organization, Democratic leaders. Because do you know how these maps get drawn in the South, y'all? It's a simple democratic process. So our minority leaders in all these chambers have to get hip to this very quickly, because to feed the litigation is going to be a different kind of strategy than Section 2. And this positive backlash, all of this with an eye towards the midterms, to delay it, mitigate it, and organize a massive turnout that also will help build a real constituency to get reforms to the court and to voting and democracy, as we have failed collectively on that thus far. So that is the dream. And I'm saying dream because the public positive launch will be around MLK Day and how we're going to sort of leverage this whole thing together. So we are building this Southern War Room in a hurry. We're going to be releasing additional elements of our VRA report as part of our organizing and awareness raising. And then we're going to work with Force Multiplier and any folks we have common cause with to raise the awareness, to raise the funds, so that we can have a coherent national narrative. Because what we all do not want is 6 months from now to wipe the sleep out of our eyes and to realize we have a new Confederacy in the South. We don't want to wipe the sleep out of our eyes, and that they're not only in Memphis with the National Guard and the military, they're in Jackson, they're in New Orleans, they're in Baton Rouge, right? They're in Savannah. That is where this is going. But here's the thing, and you can take it off the screen share, Eva. And this is like just brutal. The thing about this crisis, because we expect the decision to come quickly, when this starts moving in January, February, March, it is going to force all of us down here, and we're trying to get prepared for it, to work in a different way across the coalition, broadly and deeply. And they're going to throw the whole kitchen sink at this, right? The military, National Guard, all of it. Here's the good news. Getting through the first half of the year with that, with our elected officials, with our movement groups. We got elected officials down here saying crazy stuff, saying maybe it's good to gut Section 2. Maybe we can get some blue dog Dems. Nope. They're just going to have MAGA districts everywhere. We have so much education and organizing to do. But here's the good news, Force Multiplier, because you all are organizers. Doing that work and getting funded to do that work in the first half of the year, it's going to make us so battle ready for the fall. So we can go win those races and deliver John Ossoff back to the Senate, get Roy Cooper in there to be his colleague. And off the record, we know that John Bel Edwards is thinking about running in Louisiana. We know that we have opportunities across the South that could change the dynamic. The last thing I'll say before I open up for questions, some of you know we won Public Service Commission statewide races in Georgia in the local elections that just happened. We won them by 20 points. Kamala Harris lost Georgia by 2.2 points. And the kind of swing that we saw, we'll have a full voter file, vote history to do more analysis. The PSC candidates won the equivalent of 151 state house races in Georgia. We need 91 to take the majority. We have an ability to win, not just at top of the ticket, but deep down ballot, which builds our power to be able to reverse or stop bad maps, and to actually, in Georgia, as we think about Warnock and future concerns, really deepen our work in Georgia. So if the only thing you care about is those pieces, this is all connected. And so as dark as a time this is, I am excited because our team and partnership, it's very clarifying, and it provides the opportunity of a lifetime to build something new, which we also need to do. So